everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Read Right to Left podcast. I am G, joined by my always wonderful co-host Ray from Whimsical Pictures.
Hey everybody.
And this month we're super excited. We have a fantastic guest, LumRanmaYasha from, various projects, but you may be familiar with them from the Manga Mavericks podcast, who has very kindly agreed to join us for this month's topic.
Ooh, hi! Thank you for having me. I really love Furuba, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
You're in good company here.
So this month we are doing a series spotlight on the much beloved manga series, and I guess larger franchise of Fruits Basket. We will be talking about a lot, hopefully, I'm sure, because there's, as I said, much beloved.
It's, dense.
Very dense.
Dense
These
manga.
volumes take... Yeah, cover to cover, I think each volume takes about an hour for me to read personally. So
yeah, they are wordy,
yeah.
And the content is not easy a lot of the time.
No, you want to take your time with it to just let everything soak in and just dwell and hold the heavy emotions.
Yeah, just read a volume and just like sit there for an hour afterwards, just like, fuck. Man.
Drown yourself in the tears.
But before we get into our discussion, before we get into your questions that everyone sent in, thank you as always for those. Lum, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit, talk about your projects?
And we're a podcast that discusses manga as both a medium and an industry. We cover all the recent manga news on a recap episode every month, and we also do coverage of newer series that we think are really interesting, like new simulpubs and stuff like that, new platforms, and we also do retrospectives on series we really love, including Fruits Basket. We did an episode last year with the hosts of Let's Stay Together, a really great Fruits Basket podcast that I'd just like to recommend. The host did a really great job covering the entirety of that series, and it's a pleasure to talk with them about this series on that episode. But we also have covered a lot of different series, and we also do interview episodes with guests who are in this community, also making content like podcasts and videos, and also people working in the industry. Localizers from publishers of all stripes and translators, others, editors. So yeah, we try to run the gamut of like different topics in the world of manga to talk about, and we've been having a blast doing it for a good 5 years now. So it's a lot of fun. And in addition to that, I also do some side podcasts like Manga Maritime Movies, where we mostly talk about anime movies and some other movies that interest us. Like, I don't think Dunkirk is an anime film, but we talked about it because we wanted to. But also, I also do Mum Squad, a Yurusei podcast. Yurusei is my favorite series. The first manga to my Ruka Takahashi. The anime just recently celebrated its 40th anniversary. And we've mainly been covering Viz's recent releases, the manga, and the movies are on Crunchyroll, so we've been covering those, and it's a blast. Yeah, I love Yurusei. It's just such a fun time, bursting with creativity, and it gives us a lot to talk about, so enjoying doing that too. And then besides podcasting and just chatting manga and soaking all that world up, I am an artist by trade. I am a freelance artist and have done work for various things, and so you can find a lot of my stuff on my Instagram at @artworks.
Awesome.
Right on.
But yeah, kind of a long-winded introduction, but
no, that is perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I also just want to shout out that we had G on Mavericks on our Blue Flag episode, and that was a really wonderful discussion. So check that out as well, please.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, and really, I mean, I've been a long time fan of Manga Mavericks, so being a guest was really exciting, and yeah, just great team over there.
Well, thank you. Those are kind.
Now that our wonderful guest has introduced themselves, I think we need to talk a little bit about the actual series that we will be discussing today. Ray, as the resident Fruits Basket aficionado,
Stan,
would you like to summarize just what is Fruits Basket and what is it about?
Okay. So, it's a 23-volume manga series that started in, I don't want to give you a year, but in the 90s.
98?
98? That sounds right. Late 90s. The early art style is very late 90s shojo. By Natsuki Takaya. Yeah, it starts out simply enough, I would say. It's a bit of a modern fairy tale set, somewhere in the metro around Tokyo. And there's a very cheerful high school girl named Toru Honda, who we are introduced to as she's leaving her tent in the woods in the morning to go to school. And we find out that she has just recently lost her mother a few months before the story starts. And she had been living with her grandfather, but he, was getting his house renovated and was like, hey, can you stay with a friend? And our, selfless, self-sacrificing to a fault heroine was like, I can't possibly burden either of my exactly two friends. So I'm just gonna live in a tent in the woods. I'm gonna be on my own after high school anyway, so I may as well get started now. Which I feel like tells you a lot of what you need to know about Toru as a character right out the gate. But it turns out that the land that she is on is not public land. It is owned by the cousin. She happens upon his house one day. The cousin of the most popular boy in school, Yuki Soma. His cousin is Shigure, and they're living together, and hijinks happen. They find out that she's living in a tent on their property, and they're like, that's terrible, why don't you just live here? So she moves in with these two young men of the Soma family, and more hijinks ensue. And literally, the plot crashes through her ceiling when the very surly third member of our little reverse harem here, another Soma cousin, Kyo Soma, crashes through the roof and challenges Yuki to a fight, but ends up, I guess, I don't even remember the convoluted, physics of how this happens, but, Toru ends up, hugging all of them on accident, and they suddenly turn into a cat, a dog, and a rat, and explain that they are, possessed by the spirits of the Chinese zodiac, plus the cat who was left out of the story. And there are, 10, 11, really, other members of the Soma family who also turn into animals when hugged by people of the opposite sex. Yep. And it goes from there as we realize, what this zodiac curse really is. It's a lot more complicated than just turning into cute animals sometimes. And yeah, it starts off pretty light and it gets pretty heavy. And that's the Fruits Basket experience.
Yeah, beyond the smiles and the cuteness lies a lot of pain.
Yep. Trauma. Yay.
A lot of sadness.
Very deep, twisted emotions that I don't think you would generally expect from a Hanato Yume series from 1998, but, you know, that's part of why it's endured, I suppose. I guess, like, Loom, like, where did you first encounter Fruits Basket? Like, what is your history with the series?
I think, like a lot of people, my first exposure to Fruits Basket was the 2001 anime adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
which, so I have an interesting exposure to it, I think, because so Funimation used to have their own like channel called the Funimation channel. It's like their own TV channel. But in addition to that, they had a syndicated block that they would air on other channels. And so my satellite provider, Dish Network, had this channel called Colors TV, and there was a Funimation channel programming back on Colors TV. And so like every weekday, every day, like at 7 to 11 was the Funimation channel block, and so every day at 7:30 was Fruits Basket. And so when I was like really getting to anime and like wanting to like just get into a lot more series, I discovered that I have Colors TV and I have this access to this Funimation channel programming block. Like I would watch that as much as I could. I wasn't necessarily allowed to watch TV on weekdays during the school year, but I would watch as much of the program as I can because it had like a lot of shows that I really got into. Case Closed, Yu Yu Hakusho, Slayers, and of course Fruits Basket was also one of those shows. Yeah.
My childhood.
So many fond memories. It's the first news entry, but speaking of iconic theme songs, like to this day, the opening theme for Fruits Basket of the original series, and then the ending theme definitely sticks to my brain. But that was my first exposure to Fruits Basket, was just like catching the anime on that program, which is interesting because it was paired in the same hour with Kodocha, another like classic shojo adaptation by the same director.
That is
Fruits Basket anime project, same director.
Close personal friend of the podcast, Akitaro Daichi. There's both of those. And both me and G's personal favorite anime of all time, Bludgeoning Angel Goku.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Well, there are a lot of fun, interesting, and weird coincidence and connections between Furuba and Kodacha, because in the dub, like, both Sana and Toro are played by Laura Bailey. Both series have like a character called Akito who is in conflict with the protagonist, who has family drama. So a lot of interesting coincidences between those coincidental similarities. But that was my exposure to the series, and then I eventually checked out the manga. In my first year of college, I managed to get at a local bookstore in New York just like most of the series of the Tokyo Pop edition. And so then I read about what the anime had covered were, and then I just ended up getting distracted with like schoolwork and didn't return to it for a long time until last year when we did the Fruits Basket episode on Maverick, is when I read through the entirety of the manga for the first time. For the longest time, it really was just the story of of everything that was covered in that first anime and those first 6 volumes of the manga that I was most familiar with. But then reading through the entirety of the story last year was just such a great experience and such a gut punch, and I truly appreciate it because I can resonate and relate to so many of the characters' struggles and feelings and difficult relationships with each other, and also I just appreciate, I think, Takaya's worldview about like what it takes to grow and become a better person, and also form healthier relationships with people around you, and just pursue your own happiness. But yeah, that's my history basically.
Okay, and G?
Well, again, I think similarly, I was introduced to the series by the 2001 anime. Not through any fun, interesting television channel. I just had the DVD release. And, enjoyed it for what it was. For people who have followed me for a while, you'll know that I started as an anime fan and didn't get into manga until quite a bit later. But once I was reading manga on a more regular basis in my early 20s, it was one of the series that I wanted to jump into because I'd heard a lot of obviously positive reviews and things about it. And we didn't have the Tokyo Pop release here in Australia. We had the Changyi release. So I owned the entirety of the Changyi release, which, for those who don't know, it was a Singaporean publisher. They were one of the largest manga distributors in Australia for a very long time, up until their bankruptcy. And so I had all of them. It's interesting because when people talk about the manga in the English sphere, they typically are talking about the Tokyo Pop release. And I haven't ever read the Tokyo Pop release. I've read, again, the Changyi release, which is not the exact same translation. They have their own completely different team. I no longer own that, so I can't even compare to, the new yen release, but I had it for many years, loved it, fell in love with the story, as many people tend to do. It is so much more than what the early anime adaptation I guess proposes or shows, represents. And so when Yen Press announced their re-release, it was a no-brainer for me to start buying those. Not only because it's just like a much larger, nicer release than the Changyi one, but also the updated translation was a big factor for me, because Fruits Basket, although it is one of the more beloved Tokyo Pop releases, it's still a Tokyo Pop release. Still a little bit janky.
Yeah.
It's pretty janky. It's very janky.
Yeah. So, if nothing else, I wanted to see a series that is so special, is so beautiful, is so powerful, being handled in the proper way. And thankfully, Yen's release, in my opinion, has achieved that, and so that's now the edition that I own, and have reread a couple times since getting. So, yeah. And of course, cool. I've not yet finished it, but I have been watching the newer anime adaptation of Furuba as well.
Nice.
There you go.
I finished it for this podcast.
Yay!
Yep. Nothing like starting a podcast to motivate you to actually do things.
Oh, yeah. No, many a series I've only finished because I had to podcast about them.
But yeah, so, hello, I'm Ray, and Fruits Basket saved my life. It's my favorite manga of all time, and it means a whole lot to me. So I did not start with the anime. I started with the manga because it was in my middle school library, I think was where I started it. and it was one of my first manga. That one, and I think Plus Anima, I like checked them out at the same time, and was reading them side by side. Which Plus Anima's fine for what it is, but it hasn't like stuck with me the way that Fruits Basket has. Actually, I got pretty lucky with my first manga. Like, those
are two solid starts.
But yeah, so I read it because like I'd kind of run out of books in the rest of the library. It was pretty small, and that was the comic book with the art that appealed to me. So that's what I picked up, and I was not a happy kid during that time in my life, for reasons that I don't feel like going into. But yeah, that series, it really helped my little tweenage self get through a lot of the garbage I was going through at the time. And I've read it so many times. Because, when you're a teenager, you can just, like, read things.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing. Just, like, read a whole series over a weekend. So I would just reread it all the time. I own the Tokyo Pop volumes. That's how I had started collecting it, and that's how I finished collecting it. But I do own the collector's editions that Yen Press's release was made out of, because I bought them in Japanese, and I have since read the series in both languages. And like I said, I've been following the new anime as well. I, fell off watching it week to week, but I did finish it for this. And I have seen the 2001 anime multiple times. But, now I don't ever have to look at it ever again because there's a new anime.
The new show is much prettier. Although, honestly, I wouldn't count the old one out. I did rewatch some of it recently, and there's some very good shot compositions and really good color in that one, too. I think people discredit it, honestly. There's still some good stuff about that.
There's a quote from Akitaro Daichi where he literally says he did not understand the appeal of the manga or why people liked it. And I have been bitter towards that man ever since.
I think that's very fair. Honestly, though, there are some points where I'm be surprised to hear that, because I feel like there's some parts that were done really well in adaptation. But that's neither here or there. I think that could be a whole other
You can talk about it if you want to.
Nah, I need to rewatch more parts, but I always remember, there are some episodes that, really stick out to me. Like, episode 18, the episode where the Yuki fan club goes to Hana's house to, find her secret. In that original show, I love the framing device of, spying through a camera on, people's conversations, and then just the extra vibe of creepiness and airiness, in how that story plays out. So, there's some directorial things.
Didn't understand why the Prince Yuki fan club got a whole episode so late in the series. So I was just watching it these girls aren't funny. Why am I watching them?
I like them a lot better in the first anime than other versions, because I think they just played up their absurdity. They had their own animated intro that was very chaotic whenever they would show up on screen to make demands of Toru or whatever. So I think that added an extra oomph of silliness that made me appreciate them. We're yeah, they're a very toxic group otherwise.
Well, I think
does get old.
That's the thing, is it's hard for me to. I mean, I guess there's parts where I do laugh at them in the manga, because I do like that Queen Bitch type of shojo manga character. Nanami is my favorite Utena character. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
But, but it's like,
Yeah.
The character who's like spoke to me the most as like, a tragic little tween, what was Yuki. So I feel like I'm like always thinking about how like fucking miserable they were making him specifically. I'm like, that's not funny.
No, they certainly did exhaust a lot of the people around them. I think the funniest part is definitely, though, their fear of Hanajima.
That is so funny. That never stops being funny. Hana is so powerful.
And then thinking that they were cursed by her brother when they went to the house.
I think that's like something I like about the manga execution, though, is like, because definitely I don't think the new anime nails like the comedy at all. It's definitely the weakest part, which I feel like, I don't know, it's a hard balance, right? Because her sense of humor is so zany and kind of out of date with like what's popular in anime now. So like the careful balance between that and the pathos of the series is like, it almost feels like in a modern adaptation they had to cut one or the other. Like one of them had to be the weaker for it, and in this new adaptation, because Daichi went so hard for the comedy in the 2001 one, I think they were like, no, we're going to be all dramatic and sad this time. So they went for a much more naturalistic, sort of pastoral approach to the direction.
No, I do think it's more faithful to Takaya's intent and the tone of her story, just generally. Like, it doesn't weave into the comedy as much, but in terms of the overall, like, focus on, like, kind of these softer moments between characters and the drama of it, I think it excels very well.
Yeah. But also, like, Takaya is funny. Like, she's really funny.
Yeah.
So,
I think Ayame stuff, no matter which version, it excels in the anime, because you need, like, the bombastic performance of all its lines to truly appreciate it, I think.
I mean, it's great, but also I do appreciate, like, the flourishes in, like, the typefaces and stuff with him.
No, credit to the letters.
But Hana, I think, definitely excels in, the manga, because it's always just, like, in the background. Like, those catty girls will do something mean to Toru, and then, like, there'll just be... The story will just continue in the main panels, and Hana will just be in the background, just, like, sending waves at them.
And Takaya uses her design to great effect to create, like, spooky images, or just, like, arresting images. Like, I think with her black dress, like, and the way her hair can blend into it sometimes, like, she does kind of have, like, that supernatural, like, quality to her does come out. Like, a really striking visual to me was, like, when she, came to comfort Toru after Kurino, like, had, like, left her speechless and sobbing. And, like, the scene of her arriving on the scene, it's, like, it like with the way like her dress was like fluttering and like her hair was blending into it, it's like her brother also looked like he was blending into it in the background. Like it's like she was coming out of the shadows. I think there was just some really cool art things done with Hanajima in the manga that took advantage of like manga's two-tone of black ink and then the whiteness of the page.
I think something that Takaya excels at in general is the use of shading. Because she'll often use, like, shading on a character's face to communicate extra levels of emotionality. The darker undertone behind, like, a smile or that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that sort of deft hand which she handles, where she should put the inks and where she should put, tone, definitely applies to her overall design aesthetic as well.
Oh yeah, you can definitely tell when the drama is about to start, when the shading takes ramp up on the characters.
Yeah, but also, like, you know, there'll be moments where it's like it's been so intense and dark on the page, and you turn the page and there's a moment of light, and there's just no shading on the page, and like your whole like heart, it just like soars along with the characters. So like when, you know, Yuki's like got his whole like backstory, and it's so he's always in shadow in this dark room, but then when he finds Toru after he's looking through these dark alleyways and it's like light, or there's,
and then that ending page of him, you know, just collapsed on the ground in his mouth forming tears, and like everything in the background is white, and it's just like we're appreciating just this visual of him, like, you know, crying happily. Yeah, it was just really, really great use again of like different tones and use of different inking.
I was watching, like, you know, the last couple episodes of the new anime, and there's a sequence right at the end that I really love in the manga in terms of composition, where we are going to be spoiling the entire series, like, from the get-go, by the way. You've had 20 years, people. But, like, you know, Kyo has been, you know, worrying, and he's, like, you know, just totally ruined things with Toru because he just, you know, is trying to leap over that last hurdle of, like, his, like, self-hatred. And, like, she's about to be discharged from the hospital, and he's waiting for her. And, like, you've got these small, crowded, dark panels full of words where he's just, like, worrying, you know. What do I even say to her? What do I like about her? Like, why do I like her? You know? And you turn the page, and she comes out of the hospital, and the entire composition opens up, and he says, "Oh, none of that matters. I like her." And it's like such a good composition.
Absolutely. Takaya is really great at 2-page spreads that have like these kind of vertical compositions of, like, you know, different sequences of where we're focusing on different parts of a scene, and then coupled with that, just the dialogue just kind of weaving kind of like an S pattern around that just like again draws you to different parts of the drawing, different parts of the page, as you're just really soaking up and appreciating just the visuals like all at once, and then just like fixating on different moments in time in the same way the characters are. I really appreciate that, just controlling the reader's own pace of reading. Just appreciate and let the moment sit with them. I just wanted to mention, like, on the subject of Kaya's comedy, the page turn there where it's like Toru runs away is also just perfect. Like, you have just this beautiful moment of Kyo realizing, no, none of these things I worry about matters. Like, I love this person in this story. You turn the page and Toru just says run away.
I mean, he deserved it. Yeah, so good. But yeah, no, I think her paneling is just like some of my favorite in manga, to be honest. It's amazing how, like, just so wordy this series is, but like when you're reading it, it is a slow read and it is dense. You can feel the density, but I never, like, I know that me and G always pick on One Piece for being too crowded. But Fruits Basket is a series that I think compositionally it doesn't feel unpleasant to read, if that makes sense. At least to me. Like, it's my eye very naturally flows from speech bubble to speech bubble. Even on a page that's like just speech bubbles, because that happens in Fruits Basket a lot. I always like feel like my eye knows where it's being drawn and where it needs to go, which is a very difficult thing to accomplish. And yeah, I just think that her paneling is incredibly good. So
Yeah, you always know what you should be focusing on, even when there's like all this background noise. And especially in earlier runs, you'll have a lot of like side commentary from characters, for comedy scenes. But like, you always know what is the important moment you should be fixating on. And then Takaya's again a great master of pacing through her compositions and where like she'll draw your attention to. So absolutely,
Yeah.
like even though like it is a dense read, it is always an engaging one, I think.
she knows how to land one of those like zingers.
Absolutely. And I think also as she goes along, she becomes more comfortable just letting the art, just letting art moments speak for themselves without any companion text. Earlier on, I did notice that there weren't as many of those moments. She really did feel the need to like include a lot of descriptions of what characters are thinking and saying. But as the series goes along, there are just like moments where she'll just let the art breathe. She'll just let an expression say everything you need to know about what character is thinking and saying. And this is an evolution of hers, I think, that continues on to her work after Fruits Basket.
Yeah, I
with
agree.
Twinkle Stars and Liz-a-Lot and Fruits Basket, another like I reread recently, and I think it's so striking to read. Like that series like reads so much faster because she just it's not as text heavy because she just emphasizes a lot of art moments more than the dialogue, which I found super interesting.
I think a big part of that is like her having to realize ways to streamline her own process, because she doesn't get picked on as much as Togashi, because I feel like just like the schedules of like when it gets released over here, but she is a creator who has a lot of chronic health difficulties, specifically related to her hands. Because she has talked about how, like, she's had all these surgeries. Like, there were huge hiatuses of, like, a year or more throughout the runtime of Fruits Basket. Because the first big one of that was that, like, her hand just, like, paralyzed itself. Like, her drawing hand. She just couldn't use it for, like, a year. And she had to get, like, and continues to have to get surgeries on that hand. So she essentially had to go through a process of having to teach herself how to draw all over again. And that's why we have this sudden, huge shift in her art. Like, it's very, very noticeable. You can tell where there was a break and where she came back. And you can see where her art was very shaky for a while. But then starts to develop more into the style that she has now. And, I can imagine how, like, that kind of thing would force her to sort of realize ways that she can, lessen the workload on herself as the person drawing it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And that style change is, every long running series will have like a change in arts from the beginning to end, but it is so noticeable the way her character designs just get like more slim. Like they were already slender to begin with, but the characters started sort of to fill out by the end of the series. And also the faces are the most notable thing. Like they're very kind of squat and have a lot bigger eyes in earlier Wildlands, but by the end they've kind of gotten a little longer. Eyes have gotten a little smaller. The arrangement of features on people's faces have gotten a little tighter, and then also the hair also becomes a little more smooth and streamlined. So it's very noticeable just how she continued to like refine her art over the Hawaiians to get like a really clean, smooth style by the end of it.
Yeah,
It's very, very striking.
She was an early, like, adopter of, like, digital art. So she does all of her stuff on, you know, a computer. Like, nowadays, every creator does all their stuff on a computer, but, like, not every creator, but a lot of, like, younger creators do. I think you know what I mean. But she was definitely someone who switched to primarily digital quite early. You know, again, just finding that it was easier for her to work that way. And I feel like you can see that shift in her style as well. Which is, that's not like a bad thing. Like, you know.
Not at all.
Computer is a tool.
Like her penmanship, yeah, you can tell the penmanship has gotten a little like crisper and smoother, and there is like a muddy quality to some of the screen tones used in the earlier volumes that, you know, kind of gets really smoothed out with the final ones, where like they're a lot brighter mostly, except for of course like darker moments, but like even in earlier volumes though there's a lot of like effects I think she was trying to do hand drawn that, you know, kind of look a little blurry and muddy, and maybe that's just also the Tokyopop release stuff, really, but even in the end. But yeah, like, no, the style, like, it just feels so smooth and so clean by the end of the series. It does look like it doesn't look completely different, but it really does show tremendous growth in her art.
Yeah. She never learned how to draw backgrounds, though.
Oh, it's okay. You know, flowery like bubbles in the background, and then these kind of screeching tony impressions of trees and simple benches. You know, that's all you need.
Going back to what you said, Ray, we've discussed at length both on podcast and off about overuse of backgrounds in certain series. So knowing your strengths and not over cluttering a page, especially with a series that is so story dense and emotionally dense. It's just it just wears you out if you're also having to look at every like tiny leaf, all the minutia of everything on a shelf. You're like, I can't do it.
I feel like if the style of that series had been too realistic, it would have been so exhausting.
And the series is about the character relations foremost, so it makes sense to put them more in the emphasis. It's less about the environment they're in. Like, we get the impressions of where they are, and that's all we need for the most part.
Very much.
There's just definitely a handful of moments where I was like, I don't know where I am. where am I?
Takaya can certainly give you a concrete sense of place, at least in her work after this. Like, there's some particularly striking moments in Liz-a-Lot that depend on like use. Depend on like just appreciating like a scenery, a location. So like she's capable of that, but I think she makes a conscious choice to like, you know, this is what's most important to appreciate in the story is just these characters, and we don't need to worry about like, you know, every nook and cranny in the background of like this room they're in or like what's outside or whatnot.
I did like a lot of the environmental details that we get in the new anime, though. Like, especially when you sort of go into different characters' rooms. You know, I feel like they had, you know, because they had those painterly-like backgrounds, they were able to really, like, bring the character of each person's room to life. So you really got those little details of, like, you know, Yuki's room always being a fucking mess. Except for his little study corner where he's got his little perfect student council president, like, bulletin board going on. Or, like, Kyo's dad having the record collection, I thought was a really interesting detail. Haru's room is a lot of fun to look around at. All of the, like, you know, goth fashion and, like, rock stuff that he's got. So that was something I did appreciate in the new anime, was just being able to see, you know, those gorgeous anime painterly style backgrounds. Not that the manga needed it, but it was a nice addition for the anime.
Absolutely, like especially as an adaptational choice to pay attention to those details, and especially because in the anime, because we will be like spending time with like these characters like on screen, that's like we're not focusing on specific moments in time. We can't break up like, you know, character shots as much as in the manga, or I mean you can, but it'll be a little disjointed in anime. So to create more of a concrete sense of space, and then to go above and beyond to reflect upon the character interacting in that environment, or how that character has affected the environment around them, I think it showed a lot of attention to detail and a lot of love and respect for the characters on the part of the creative team for the anime.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of characters, did we want to talk about some characters in particular?
Yeah. So, where do we start? Toru?
I think
Toru is like
Yeah.
the crux of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. The story really does revolve around her, and eventually so do all the characters. Like, she is kind of their emotional pillar, like, who gives them comfort and support and like encourages all of their growth in various different ways.
But similarly, she's receiving support and growth and comfort from them, and that's what really makes it. It's not one person being everything for everyone, although it may seem that way initially, right? Toru is just as much a vulnerable, traumatized, hurt person, but she handles her trauma in a much different way compared to the Somas, all of the Somas, which I think there's an element of recognizing that trauma in each other that is so effective in Fruits Basket, that it's very, as a reader, it's incredibly easy to recognize that, you know, it hasn't been a good time for the Somas. Some hide it better than others, but overwhelmingly they're all struggling in different ways, and they really only have each other, and sometimes not even that. Comparatively, Toru, if you are just reading or watching or whatever it is on a more surface level, or not, you go into it not seeing a lot of the red flags that are indicative of her being in a really tough situation and not wanting to get other people involved. She's very good at...
Oh, you mean like the fact that, like, she didn't feel like she could rely on either of her two friends and instead went to live in a tent in the woods?
Yeah.
That kind of red flag.
Exactly. But then also, a little bit later, but still earlier on in the story, her going to move back in with her grandfather and her dad's family, who just straight up don't like her, and her feeling that gratitude of like, yeah, they might not like me and they might not like, but we're family and they're putting up with me and I appreciate that, rather than taking her
nothing.
Yeah, they're doing this for me. I have to be grateful, even though I'm unhappy.
There's nothing for me to be ungrateful for. They're putting up with me in this house. Like, I could be on the streets. They could kick me out. Like, no, they shouldn't, though.
Yeah. Toru, at the beginning of the story, really put other people's happiness and comfort above her own. Like, even, like, not relying on Saki and Arisa to, you know, house her. Like, she was like, oh, I don't want to bother them. Like, I'll just do this on my own. Like, and that also, it doesn't come from a completely selfless place, though. It also comes from this fear of, like, oh, I don't want to overburden these people and then be rejected by them. She's as much afraid of that as, like, other characters in the Somas are. Just maybe takes us a little bit longer to recognize, oh, no, she is also operating from this place as like, I don't want to be abandoned or rejected, so I will be like this perfect supporting person, and really selfless and always be there for my friends, but never be bothersome to them.
Exactly. She has, but she has a huge amount of abandonment issues through no real fault of her own. It's just the very sad, unfortunate reality that her father died when she was very young, and her mother, who was the closest person to her, also died very early on in her life. Recently within storyline, but losing a parent at 15 or 16 is, devastating. And she has a fantastic friend support group. But the reason they are so close is because Tori is great at finding people who might need that extra bit of, who aren't immediately going to notice anything that's odd with her, who also don't want rejection, or have been rejected so much by quote unquote the normal society that it's a little bit safer for her to fit that role. Plus, she's not always we see throughout her childhood, she's constantly been bullied. She's constantly been made fun of for being just a bit naive and slow and whatever else, caring, trusting, whatever it may be.
Also, because her mom is, eloped with some dude when she was very young, and, always has dyed red hair, and she's known for being, a bad news. That's why her family doesn't like her either.
Exactly.
So, but, I also think it connects not just to the abandonment issues that she has because her parents died, but that she has a very specific traumatic moment that she keeps a very tight lid on throughout the series until the very end, which is that after her father died, when she's 4 at this point, 3 or 4, and her mother, who, as good of a person as she was, as good of a person as, I don't know how to quantify Katsuya's character, seeing as he courted, a relationship with one of his middle school students as a student teacher.
Yeah.
But the narrative wants us to think he was a good guy.
Yeah.
But,
there's this comment when Takaya is, doing that story in the Tokyopop editions. She has, her autotones where it's oh, love is love and is good no matter what age. So long as there's love, age doesn't matter, whatever. And I'm no, what are you talking
No.
Oh,
How can you be so insightful about adult-child trauma?
No, not a message you should be sending to your readers.
Oh,
no.
Anyway.
Early 2000s shoujo. And even, honestly,
very
now,
much
why?
clamp-like philosophy of these characters are soulmates. It doesn't matter what age they are. No matter what universe they would be together, because they're soul pairs, they're soulmates.
But anyway,
it's no.
A core theme of the series, and part of what makes that slightly more stomachable to me, is that they aren't perfect people. Sometimes there are just people that in your life who are in a really weird, fucked up situation, but they're vibing, the best way they know how, and you're well, I can't really do anything about that, so have at it, I guess. Which is the vibe that those two give me. But, okay, where was I? Katsuya died, Toru was 3 or 4, and, her mom is obviously still a very young woman, was over-reliant on Katsuya, I think. They had a very codependent kind of love. And she sort of completely falls into despair and literally, leaves her child. This was something that I, took note of, this time around re-watching the story through the anime. Is that she left her very young child alone for, a couple days. just wandering around in this depressed state, and ultimately, like, attempting suicide is the idea, right? Like, Toru finds her in a state where she's, you know, even as such a young child, she's like, if I let her go now, she's not going to come back.
Yeah.
And
she was also bombarded by all her relatives, like, saying, what? This child doesn't even look like her father.
Yeah.
Like, this is the consolation? Is this child is no good.
There's a moment in the anime where, like, she's, like, waiting for her mother to come home, and she, like, just starts practicing to herself the ways that her father would speak, which is why she speaks.
Yeah.
She speaks a very, the way she talks
is very,
very cute.
Politely. Yeah.
Yeah, so in Japanese, the thing is that she speaks, like, very ridiculously politely at all times, but also just, like, wrong. Like, her honorific speech is, like, slightly wrong. It's not grammatically correct. Which is very adorable, and that is objectively the reason why Takaya chose to write her that way, is that it's cute. But, the reason that she does it in the story is that her father was always using honorific speech with everyone, and it was something that was kind of a tic of his. So, you know, she started just, like, mimicking the way that he would talk when her mother came home, and, you know, she got praised for, like, oh, you sound just like Katsuya, and so she kept at it. But, you know, she's hiding these very bitter feelings towards her father for taking her mother from her, in her heart, and she's harboring this idea that, like, if she doesn't provide something for the other person in her life, that she is going to be left behind. Mm-hmm. That if she doesn't project the perfect, loving face that they want to see, not the person that she is, but the person that they want to see, that she will be abandoned. And we see her sort of... So that's why we get this very sort of Pollyanna-esque character at the beginning. And sort of don't really see her, because she's helping so many other people deal with their shit, that it's only once all of those people have sort of made those first few steps and can finally, like, tread water long enough to turn around and see that there's still someone behind them drowning. Mm-hmm. That, you know, they can finally start to encourage Toru to really open that lid that's very painful for her. And realize that, like, she has value as a person without doing anything. Like, she doesn't have to be everything to everybody in order not to be abandoned. That there are people in her life who think that she has worth because she's her, not because she's putting on some face.
Yeah. As much as, like, other characters did rely on her, or did find in her, like, someone who could validate them, who could be a source of comfort to them, and just, like, allow them to be vulnerable without, you know, casting judgment on them, Toru needed that for herself. Mm-hmm. Like, she needed someone who would allow her to confess and express, like, feelings that she had kept bottled inside, and she was afraid to let out, lest it break the illusion of what other people thought of her. Mm-hmm. And she does find that eventually in Kyo. In Kyo, she finds someone where she ultimately is able to, like, open that lid and be vulnerable on and confess that she was holding on to these feelings of fear of abandonment, the feelings of resentment. You know, something that she was scared to admit is something that you notice throughout the story, is that Toru does not think ill of anyone, even people mistreating her, even Akito, when they are assaulting her at, like, the summer vacation home. Like, even after that, Toru doesn't think ill of Akito, even after learning about the curse stuff. But, like, you know, it's her father. Like, she did, in deep in her heart when she was a kid, like, resent her father because her mom was just obsessed with her dad, and ignoring her, and that's where she tried to imitate her dad, and she
Mhm.
was afraid to admit that, afraid that she was capable of disliking someone or
Yeah.
hating someone, especially with the self-awareness that she know that it was misguided, because she know that her father was kind to her, he was a good, person to her, but in her heart, in her mind, she thought of him as a bad person because of the impact it had on her mother and
Mhm.
the effects that had on her. So she needed to just be able to say that to someone, to be able to finally confess that, and
Well, and
she does find that.
yeah, it's an interesting parallel when you say that to Kyo, who also, in order to cope with all the shit in his life, like, really needs to create um, this monster. Like, he needs to create someone that he can just dislike without thinking about it too much. And that's Yuki. We didn't really say, but, well, I guess I said, like, Kyo immediately, like, starts punching him when he crashes through the ceiling. But they've got a very Tom and Jerry cat and mouse dynamic going on. That, of course, gets much more tragic and awful, and, they both have reasons for their deep-set resentment of each other as the series goes on. But,
It's a very grass is always greener kind of envy between them. Because they see in each other things that they want without recognizing the pain that the other person is going through. Like, they both want... they end up confessing to the by the end of the story, I want to be like you, because they saw the other person be able to have experiences and freedoms that they longed for, that they couldn't have.
Yeah,
And
at the moment where Yuki is finally just, like, completely returning all of the physical garbage that Kyo always throws at him, and just, like, fucking beats the absolute shit out of Kyo, and he's like, I want it to be like you, and Kyo's like, God damn it, I want it to be like you too.
And it is a common refrain in the series that, people need a bad guy to single out. They need, like, someone to lay blame to kind of push off their own feelings of guilt or their inferiority complexes or their stresses. And so they create these scapegoats that are people that can say, it's because of this person that my life is like this. And this person, their life is so much better, and they have not gone through all the hardships I've gone through, and they don't know them. And they put distance between each other by, like, pushing off all of their ill will and their own, like, personal, like, feelings of distress on someone else.
Yeah,
and that's kind of, in a grander scheme, what the cat represented in the Zodiac for all the people affected with the curse, is that, the cat is worse off in this family. The cat has, like, an additional, more horrible true form that is reviled by everyone, and the cat is like so looked down upon, so outcast from this family, that they are going to be locked up in the compound for the rest of their lives after they reach a certain age. And it's just a ritual, a tradition that only exists in this family, so that everyone afflicted by the curse can say, well, at least I'm not as worse off as the cat. My life
At least I'm not
is
that
not
guy.
as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can feel a little bit better myself because there is someone who is suffering worse.
Yeah, and before we move on to Kyo entirely, I just wanted to, say how, like, this creation of, like, a scapegoat, a creation of a monster that you can hate, that you don't have to think about, like, their circumstances. I like how the series, because obviously it ties into the core themes of, like, empathy and how important it is to give other people the benefit of the doubt. But I like that the series examines it as, like, a very valid and often necessary coping mechanism of trauma and abuse to create this kind of scapegoat. And is very, I guess, empathetic, towards almost, well, the readers towards readers, right? To anyone who does this out of, like, trauma. it doesn't say, like, Kyo is bad for doing this to Yuki. It's like, there was a reason that he had to do this, and that's valid, but that doesn't make it right. And also, it doesn't make it healthy. This is what he has to do to move on, is realize that actually, all of the things that he hated about Yuki was just shit that he made up in his head, essentially.
Yeah, it's like a desperate survival tactic in order to give some characters a sense of reason to keep going. It's like to say, for Kyo in particular, the idea of, like, if I beat Yuki, I'll be accepted into the family. That's something that drives him to keep going, to, like, be able to, like, push off all the guilt and all the anxiety he's feeling to the side and say, okay, I have this driven goal, and if I achieve this, if I beat this person who is the representation of all this ill will, all this, like, trauma that I've been feeling, if I defeat that, then I will get the acceptance that I really want. But obviously, it is wrong for him to, like, push all of that on Yuki. But, like, that's, in his situation, that's really all he had to go on, because he didn't see another option for him.
Forcing a kid with asthma who has a cold to, like, run a race.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, in a similar sense, the two of them, as mentioned, they've always been at each other's throats because they've been envious of the other person. Not even inherently realize, like, as a child, you don't understand that necessarily, but as their older teen selves, they do, and that is something that's very major for them. Confronting that and admitting that, and hopefully allowing that to have a positive change to their relationship, because ultimately, as I mentioned, like, all of the Somas are really like this one community that understand each other. There's no one, even within the larger Soma family, there's not a lot of people who understand what it is to be the Zodiac, and what it is to be, especially the cat within the Zodiac, and thinking that was who he was, and the inevitability for him. It's really, and obviously because Kazuma does have that, like, has had the cat in his family, so he does have this personal investment or interest in him, and has therefore become like this parental figure to Kyo over the course of his life.
Did we say who Kazuma is?
No. Kazuma, is his mentor. He's a martial artist.
He runs a karate dojo. And all the Soma kids go there. Haru and Yuki and Kyo and Kagura. Rin. But yeah, Kyo, I believe he's, like, has official custody of Kyo at this point. He's Kyo's adopted father. In any case, he is Kyo's adopted father.
Yeah. No, Kyo recognizes him as his true father.
Yeah.
Because he actually he loves him genuinely, truly. He is thinking of his future, and he wants the best for him, and that's why, he was willing to risk Kyo hating him by giving him that push, like, exposing his true form to Toru. Like, he wanted to push him to see a future for himself. And it started from a place of guilt of, like, how he had treated his grandfather and seen him so lonely and, like, rejected candy from his grandfather. And from that place of guilt, though, it just genuinely formed a compassion and true caring for Kyo as a person. And it's a truly great example of, like, found family. It's like blood ties are not, like, the strongest or unbreakable bonds. Like the bond between Kyo and his father, his true father in Kazuma, is like much stronger and much more healthy than any like relationship he had to his blood parents. And that continues on. Spoilers for Fruits Basket another, but like even Kyo's son acknowledges Kazuma as his true grandfather, the only grandfather in his mind, rather than Kyo's biological father.
Well, I think there's definitely something to be said in that the Zodiac curse is within this one extremely large family, right? The Somas, who are all to some percentage expectations.
They're related to some degree. I think it's it's a good thing we don't know how closely they are related by blood, considering
don't think about it.
How incestuous this family is.
But I mean, probably pretty.
Yeah.
It's like an ancient Japanese family that still lives on its like ancient compound, right?
And
it's best not to think about how close degree of cousins some of these kids are.
But in saying that, that's why the whole family is very insular, is very isolated, and Akito makes it kind of pushes this idea of that the Somas are the only ones that will ever understand the Zodiac. And most specifically, Akito is the only one who will ever understand the Zodiac, and that's how they, can express their controlling, control over the situation. Yeah. But through exposure to obviously Toru, and not all of these kids are the children of like two Somas getting together. What's his name? Momiji. His mother's very obviously not Japanese, but more to what my point was going to be is that with a lot of these Zodiacs, although there's a huge emphasis by the family, by the head of the family, that the family are the only ones who will ever understand them, who will ever accept them fully, blah, 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 we see how often a lot of these kids are rejected by their biological parents when they are discovered to be part of the Zodiac. Either rejected or completely, like, suffocated, cloistered away. And which are two sides of a very similar coin, neither of which are good. And so there's always that possibility, or when you read it, you're thinking, the family have hidden this under their explanation of like protecting them. It's all very obviously more so because of the shame and unusualness and persecution that they think will come from that, rather than any actual care for these individuals.
I think it's
it's a means of control. Like the family has created this lie, like, no one outside this family will understand you, and so you need to live in this kind of mode. Akira in particular wants to cling to this, like, all the Zodiacs will come back to me. We have this unbreakable bond, and they can't escape that. But ultimately, it's, like, clearly not true that only in the family can they find love and acceptance, and the outside world will reject them. But that's, like, the lie that they want to believe in order for, like, the family to be together, and, like, for Akito in particular, they don't want, like, anyone to leave them. They want to have control of their own little world, and inside the Soma compound, the Soma family itself is kind of run like the cult, almost. Like they have, like, this inner compound. They have like this, like, outside the compound, there's, like, other houses of families. It's just like one big territory of, like, hey, this is all our world, and we sometimes take in outsiders, but in general, like, we all operate within this, and no one can escape because of blood ties and whatnot.
I wanted to, like, take that a little further, because I think that there's an aspect of tradition here. Like, I don't think there's necessarily, like, you know, obviously Akito is very manipulative and is very operating from, like, I need to manipulate these people however I can in order to keep them here around me. But the reason that, you know, she's, like, become that way in the first place is because she literally is, like, confesses to Kureno or Shigure or someone. She's like, I don't know any other way to live. No one has taught me. But the old maid, I think, is, you know, very much, like, the ultimate embodiment of this idea of, like, why do we do things like this? Because this is the way we've always done them, and that's what makes it correct. And you have, like, you know, the fairy tale that ultimately set this in motion of, you know, the sort of unnamed Soma ancestor, who's some sort of wizard, right? Inviting the original animals, and giving them, you know, the gift of immortality through, reincarnation, because they want, like, a banquet that never ends. So they want, like, these traditions to just keep going and going and going and going. And the reason that they should sustain themselves is because they have to, because this is what we've always done and it can't end because we've always done it. And
they're
and
they're afraid of change. They're afraid of things to end.
Well, because
Like,
yeah, and, you know, a goodbye is always lonely. That's, you know, another thing that the series repeats over and over. But it's also, like, the idea that this kind of, like, toxic abuse, and it really is, like, a very sharp, like, political critique as well of the old patriarchal Japanese family system. Which makes it even more interesting that the Soma family is actually a matriarchy, unbeknownst to most members. Because there's definitely some sharp, like, critique of, like, it being specifically a patriarchal structure within Akito's character. But, and the way that she's been raised. But, you know, it's this idea that, like, these toxic family situations, these abusive family situations that go back for generations and generations, at some point, you know, maybe it started out being good to somebody, but it's just twisted itself, because at this point everyone's just tired and forced together by a tradition they don't even know the origin of. Like, why are we even doing this, you know? But it's like, the answer to why are we doing this is because it's how we've always done it. And, like, there's a path clearly set out for us here. The cat will be locked away. The rat will live with God forever. That it's comfortable, you know? It's like that metaphor that shows up throughout the series of, like, you know, boiling to death in lukewarm water, right? It's more comfortable to just keep going the way things are than to have to start entirely anew. Like, everyone in that family is, because they didn't grow up with a strong support system, and they didn't grow up with, like, you know, all of the advantages that comes with. You know, they're essentially having to create not just their life, but their self from scratch. Because it's been just, like, destroyed from the inside out since they were born. And that's hard, and it hurts, and there's, you know, gonna be so much pain, but that pain is worth it, is what the series is saying, I guess, to me. Is that it's... A lot of times people stay in an abusive situation because it's easier that way, because they just don't know how to get out of it. They don't know who they are outside of that abusive situation. And that's scary. That uncertainty is scary. But in order to survive, they have to get out of it anyway. And I think that sort of I mean, I think the extended metaphor of the curse works towards a lot of ends, but certainly that aspect of it being so ancient and being something that, you know, has twisted so much that it doesn't even resemble what it originally was, is just such a brilliant metaphor, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. You see them grapple with this sense of identity. Like, even though it's painful to them, at the very least, the Zodiacs can always know where they stand in the sense of, like, well, I am the rat, I am the dog in the Zodiac. And then you see how it's kind of sad and scary when that curse breaks and they're like, well, this bond, this connection I have, like, that I knew I could rely on to define myself, well, that's gone now, and I have to redefine myself. And it's also true of Aikido. It's like, Aikido's here is like, well, if I'm not the god that, like, I was told from childhood that I am, if I'm not the person that was born to be loved and cherished by everyone, then, like, who am I? Like, outside of the Soma family, like, what am I? And she's afraid. She's afraid that she won't, like, find anyone who will love her or validate her if she leaves the confines of family, even though she's miserable inside it as much as anyone. And yeah, it's just that fear, the fear to change, the fear to break these cycles of abuse, lest like you find yourself in a worse situation, because like at least you have something to rely on in the sense, like, you know, you're a part of this family. And if you leave this family, who are you? What are you? Like, where are you in the world? And yeah, it's a thing that the series grapples well with. But I think, like, Momiji's speech to Akito in particular when his curse breaks is very particularly encapsulates the theme of, like, I won't let you define, like, what my happiness can be. I don't know what form it'll take. I don't know where I will go, what it will take me, but I'm going to choose to believe that I can find myself, I can find a place and my own happiness. And I guess just taking that effort to be able to step away, step outside of this cycle that is hurting you in order to figure out and find what you will make you happy and what you will, at a place where you will be loved and you can love, is so important. And that's a decision we see a lot of characters take at the end of the story, particularly with Kureno in particular. He just completely leaves the family altogether and goes to a place far away. Like, for so long he had been absolutely, maybe not so good for him, his relationship with Arisa, again, another problematic thing, but no, I mean, like, he so long was stuck by, you know, Akito's side, just out of the guilt of, like, I don't want to leave this child, even though that's not what she needed from him. Like, he should have like told her what he tells her, like, right before, like, she stabs him, like, that, hey, you know, this is not good for you to be here, it's not good for us, like, we need to leave, we need to be comfortable with leaving, and just
he's self-sacrificing in the same way that Toru is. You know, he's a constant foil for her within the series of, like, if she hadn't chosen to grow past her more negative tendencies, then she probably would have ended up like Kureno is sort of a recurring thing throughout the series. She would have ended up just, like, being a very toxic enabler for someone to just abuse her and kick her into the mud.
It's a double-edged sword of being self-sacrificing. Is, like, you won't, if you're only thinking of someone else's needs, sometimes you're actually, like, not giving them what they really need. And that's which particularly true.
Tough love.
The Kureno situation. Absolutely.
Or therapy. God. I think... Yeah. Actually, I think it's kind of funny that, like, a lot of people will be like, I don't understand why nobody in the Soma family has therapists. And it's like, you know, the answer is always that, you know, it would be inconvenient to the story if therapy existed. But the real reason is that, like, if you were in this kind of toxic family dynamic with such a powerful, all-encompassing, wealthy, old noble family, do you really think that you would have enough control over your life, your finances, and your decisions to get into therapy? Like, none of these people are in a position where they would be able to pursue actually, like, getting professional mental health care.
Akito would probably put the kibosh on it, saying that's unnecessary. Just see Hattori or someone.
Probably gouge out both of your eyes, to be honest, for asking.
Yeah. I mean, we see in the story, basically, in the way other people confess their feelings to, and their anxieties, their stresses to each other, that is them essentially performing therapy. Like, the fact that they have someone, like, who is outside of the situation, just listening to them and appreciating their story without, like, passing judgment, maybe giving some advice, but, like, just not, like, being so involved that these other people can feel comfortable just, like, letting loose. Like, with Yuki and Kakeru, Yuki just telling, hey, here's this entire all these feelings I'm having for Toru, and, like, here's kind of my embarrassment of, like, I don't know how I should approach these feelings to her. I don't know, like, how to reconcile these. And just, Kakeru saying, hey, this is okay. Whether you want to pursue this romantically or not, you shouldn't feel ashamed of these feelings. It's like, it's moments like that where it's like what the characters need. The characters just need, like, other people to, like, hear them and hear their pains, anxieties, and just let them know, hey, it's okay that you're feeling this way. It's good that you're sharing and letting out there. And now that you have been able to admit this out loud to yourself and someone else, now you can use, like, your self-awareness of, like, what you're going through to make a decision for how to address it and change for the better.
I would argue that some characters, like Akito and Ren especially, should probably pursue additional medical solutions.
Yeah. Ren, I think, is suffering from some sort of mental illness. Or at the very least, she's, like, a definite narcissist or sociopath in her outlook and her possessiveness and paranoia. That rubbed off on Akito, but I think Akito eventually, and from the place that we understand how she's grown as a parent and another, I think that she by the end of the story, she's on the path to growth and healing as a person after being in an abusive environment for so long that had warped her into how she behaves and how she treated other people.
Wait, Shigure had a kid? I didn't read Fruits Basket Another.
Yeah,
sorry, spoilers, but yeah.
I mean, we have a question about Fruits Basket Another, so I'm gonna keep my thoughts until we are discussing it. But yes,
I read like 2 chapters of Fruits Basket Another and decided it wasn't for me. So,
well, we can talk about it later. But I think that what we learn of Akito and, like, how she chose to take responsibility for how she had hurt people in the story, and what we learn of that in another, I think it shows that she truly is trying to do right by the people that she had hurt, and she has trying to grow as a person and a kinder person, and I think that's reflected on how she has raised her son and another too, and what we learn of, like, their relationship. So, I think that, yeah, like, I think you just need to be comfortable. Like, if there's something you're scared of doing, if there's something that you're afraid you can't do, you need to just be given that push or that confidence with saying, yeah, I have self-worth and I am capable of changing myself and, pursuing things that make me happy and make me a fuller person. But through that, then you can start forming, like, healthy relationships with people around you. But yeah, at the same time, you need other people to, like, recognize and validate the pain you're going through, or like what is good about you as well, which is also a very powerful, important message in Keith's introduction chapter.
I actually, on that note, I think I will put the Fruits Basket another question here because Lum, you sort of answered. I mean, you gave your answer, and Ray, you gave your answer. But Kendra at Sniper of My Heart asked, "Have you read Fruits Basket another?" Lum, obviously you have. I also have. Ray, not for you. She and Kendra said, "I finished and was like, where's the rest? I like that another kind of addresses that Akito and the rest of the Zodiac aren't super buddy-buddy," which is true. Despite it, well, I mean, it's any sort of toxic relationship, abusive relationship is not healed overnight. Sometimes it never, and for good reason, never gets to a point where it's everyone's cool now and hey, sorry about all the abuse and trauma over the years, but
yeah, it's not a perfect happily ever after. No, there are some relationships that
if she kept barging into their lives after all of that, it would prove that she'd not learned anything. So.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
One of my thoughts about another, I have a mixed but generally positive view towards another. I think it's an unnecessary sequel insofar as that it is entirely fan service of like, oh, here's all these characters that you cared about in the first one. Although we never see any of the characters from the first season or the first like original story.
We only see some secondary characters. Yeah. Like we see like Hiro's sister all grown up.
We see Hanajima.
Megumi's like a teacher, isn't he?
We don't see any of the core main
Hanajima's
protagonists.
brothers,
we see,
that one is the teacher.
Yeah, he's like a teacher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Takei is the principal.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like, oh, hey, you remember these characters? And then obviously a large portion of the main cast is the second generation of these Soma Zodiacs. Who are not Zodiac, like, so again, spoilers for the end of Fruits Basket, but the curse is broken. Zodiacs don't exist anymore. These are just the children of the original cast, including, of course, Toru and Kyo's son, and Yuki's son as well. So the main premise of Fruits Basket Another is, this family of Somas and their friendship with a girl who's very quiet and, standoffish and not really very confident in herself from their school, and sort of in a reverse situation to the original Fruits Basket. She's the one being brought in by the Somas in order to help her break through her traumatic family life, the abuse that she's going through, and giving her a support system that and a happier life that she's never really had thanks to her mother. So I say that I have a complicated relationship with it because I do think it's an unnecessary sequel. I don't think that we needed to see everyone's children in high school doing things. It is more so like, hey, remember all of these characters you know and love? Well, this is their children. Aren't they similar to their parents, sort of thing? But I will say that I do appreciate that it's through just the sheer premise of it. It suggests that now, having broken out of their own cycle of abuse, and now finding their own happiness as individuals and with whomever their partners may be, that the original characters have had a much happier life. They're still going through this process of healing and hoping, which has had a really positive influence on their relationships and their children, and so their kids haven't had the traumatic, they personally haven't had the traumatic upbringing that, you know, all of these kids in the original have, but they're not unaware of that. And because of being aware of how their parents did have these traumas, were in a really toxic, terrible, abusive relationship, all of these cousins, again, are like quite close. They do have a really strong family bond, but they recognize that trauma, that abuse in other people, and it's sort of I don't want to say a karmic continuation of supporting people, but it really does feel like there has, you know, overwhelmingly Fruits Basket was a very happy ending, and another just kind of reiterates that and also gives that back to the world. It didn't, this happiness and this escape or whatever from trauma didn't end with them. It made them stronger people to be able to give that support and happiness to the next generation of their family, but also to others who may need it, in the way that Toru provided for all of them, or majority of them, in the original. And again, vice versa for her. It's not a perfectly done series. It's very unfinished. I don't even know if it is actually done because it ends very abruptly. It's just...
Well, I think Sawa's character arc by the end of the third volume is pretty complete.
Yeah.
There is a 13th chapter centered around Shiki, Akito, and Shigure's kid that doesn't have like a super conclusive note, but I think it explores a potential continuation of the story of like Shiki trying to help his mother like reconnect with the rest of the family. At least that's a want of his, because it hurts him so much that she is clear, you know, she's like sacrificing like her own happiness in a sense, or like she's being accommodating of the other Zodiacs by like not attending family reunions or whatever, and she's always in the crosshairs between the factions within the Zodiac family, and he just wants to help her, you know, find a place in the family again, and like rebuild relationships with other members of the family. So I felt that's the note where the chapter ended off of. It's like, you know, he has like kind of let out his anger, and like, you know, Shiguri and Akita are like saying, oh no, we're just gonna leave this here. It's like gonna be a memento of like the first time you really express yourself. And he's just saying, you know, you can't let go of things in the past. It's like kind of sadly, it's like you can't move on from this past trauma and like move forward and in a way of like you can rebuild these relationships. And like I think that there's a value in like seeing that story, and I wonder if Takaya will continue that.
Well, I think she's mentioned on Twitter that, you know, there was health stuff that led to her having to finish up another as well. Which
was my assumption. It's not, again, it's somewhat of an unnecessary sequel. I don't think there's no merit to it. I do think that there is a lot of positive that you can get out of it. In saying that, I don't think it's a must read for even established fans of the series, just because it does toe that line of like just complete fan service of like, okay, it's I don't want to make the comparison, but it's a very Boruto's dad kind of like addition. Like, oh hey, here's all these kids from characters that you care about. You know nothing about them, so I don't know if we should care about these kids. And another isn't long enough at 3 volumes to really establish itself in the same way that other next generation stories do or have. So you get somewhat of a superficial look at a lot of these, you know, progeny versus deeply exploring their personal, backgrounds and whatever else, which I mean is fair because the main character, this girl, is really the focus, and it is more so about a singular person's trauma or traumatic or abusive home life versus a dozen people's abusive home lives.
Like 30.
Yeah.
I am just, like, fundamentally allergic, I think, to Next Generation stories.
Mm-hmm.
But, so, like, I read the first couple chapters and I was like, okay, not for me. But also, like, and I don't know if there's, like, some sort of in-universe explanation for it, but I would imagine the practical explanation is just, the primary reason the series exists, which is fan service. But it does kind of bother me that, like, it felt like a big step for all of these people to go their separate ways at the end of the series and not be near each other for a while. And it kind of made me feel a little yucky inside that somehow all their kids are going to the same high school now.
I mean, that's
just like,
that's fair, but also being apart or, like, having your own space and being away from each other for a while, and also having a 17-year-old kid is, like, how long is a while? Like, is it 5 years?
Yeah.
Is it
Honestly,
25
it's
years?
like...
I would also say, like, the characters do live separately from one another.
They
like,
all
from what we understand of their home lives. They don't live in the Soma compound. They live in, like, faraway places, but the kids are close. Like, they're just close relatives, and then they all have kind of made a conscious choice to attend school or live in the same place because they're all close. And also, in particular, like, Kyo and Yuki's kids, like, they want to go to their parents' high school to understand, like, what kind of lives their parents had lived, because they wanted to understand them
because
better,
they
like,
are
after learning about their histories.
somewhat secretive about the ins and outs, and when they are more aware of the amount of shit they went through in high school in particular, that's what gives it the appeal to them versus well, in universe that's the explanation. Of course, it's just because I don't think it would be as easy to have a dozen characters who aren't going to the same high school or similar schools areas in the same way that, like,
I guess it just...
Yeah. And they're close with Akito's kid because she, left him with other members of the family when they were doing reunions and stuff, even though she didn't attend herself, because she didn't want to deny, like, his ability to get to know his family. So, like, that's why, like, even though Akito hasn't separated herself from the rest of the family, why, the next, second generation, like, they're all close with him anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, there's so many, like, dynamics that I've seen where, like, people will get out of, a abusive or cultish situation only to be wrapped back in by sheer circumstance, decades after the fact. And it just, like, I don't know, it makes me squirmy.
I mean, so. That's absolutely 100% true. On the other hand, this is also a fictional shoujo manga that's, like, been timed with a new anime, and...
Well, I mean, yeah. That's why I'm not saying it's bad, I just didn't want to read it.
Yeah.
But I do think there's more, like, these particular characters. Like, there's a particular note in the story where Kyo and Yuki's kids are, like, talking to themselves about, like, how happy it kind of makes their parents feel to see that, they are such close friends. Like, considering their past relationships. Like, that means a lot to them. So I think there's value in seeing, like, hey, like, despite the fraught relationships of their parents, like, their kids have become, like, a really close and supportive family unit who are there for each other and are trying to help a member of their family out who is in need, in addition to helping out this girl. And I honestly was very invested with Sawa's storyline, and I did, and her with the particular dynamics of her relationship with her mother and the way she had kind of taught of herself at the beginning of the story, like I did really resonate with those experiences. So I personally was very moved by Mother, and I would agree though that like and the grand scheme, like there is a lot of there that is like meant to appeal to existing fans of Fruits Basket in terms of callbacks and references, and then like seeing the children of all the characters we loved in the original. But I think there's like something to be said of like learning and getting a sense of catharsis from like, hey, these are how these kids turned out, and that kind of reflects in a certain way on like what kind of lives their parents must have led afterward. And we get some nice details of like what how their parents are doing too, which I appreciated. But yeah, I don't want to go too much on another because I actually a little while ago I recorded a podcast on another with the Let's Stay Together crew on their show, so that's probably already out by the time you're listening to this too, so I'll just refer you to that. But my general impressions are pretty positive on another, and I wouldn't mind if Takaya continues writing installments, though if I were to have a choice between continuing another and then continuing Liz-a-Lot, I want Liz-a-Lot to come
more
back.
Liz-a-Lot.
It's been 8 years, so I don't know. But
yeah, I want more of that series. I like it.
Yeah.
But also, you know, she should do whatever is best for her health and everything.
No, absolutely.
She can rest on her Fruits Basket royalties for the rest of her life if that's what feels right to her. So, anyway, what happens to Shigure in another?
It's just kind of assumptive.
I mean, he and Akira are together.
I mean, we
we
never see anything relating. Do we see anything relating to Shigure?
We'd have some glimpses of them as parents to Shiki, like particularly in the latest chapter. Like, you know, when we see them comment on like Shiki break the mirror in the bathroom or whatnot. But a lot of the details we get are like Shigure is, you know, kind of a teasing dad. You know, he likes to make fun of his son a bit. You know, when he knows he's embarrassed or like nervous and stuff. You know, he's still got that kind of trickstery, prankstery personality to him, but Shiki will admit that Shigure is like a good fodder to him. But like, you know, all the kids do call out of like, oh, Shigure is like kind of a jerk or the worst or stuff. I will his personality. He's like a real man child.
But I will also admit that I didn't care about him at all in this thing, so I was more interested in like Toru and Kyo and Yuki, and I never remember his wife's name, as
Machi.
Yeah.
Machi? Aww.
Machi.
I like Machi.
I don't dislike her, I just never remember her name. As parents, because we don't see a lot of them. It's more glimpses of them as told by their children, but like, there's a really powerful moment in another where Yuki's son is talking about how the first time he ever saw his father cry was in happiness at just how much better his life was now. And it's like, oh, that's really lovely. Like, that's so incredible.
Yeah. No, Yuki being moved to tears by his son telling him that his son thanking him for creating a happy home that he loves to come back to. And, like, Yuki, it's just really sweet.
So, yeah, there's a lot of good in another. It has its fair criticisms, and again, I don't think it's for every fan. I don't think it's a necessary read, but I do think that if you're interested, if you have the wherewithal to read something that's a bit more just like an additional bit of fan service, see how things are going, then it's fine. You know, it's good. It's not a waste of an hour or whatever, however long it takes to read. It's very short.
Yeah. It's a good, compact re-emphasis of the series' core themes, with a compelling protagonist, and then like a lot of nice catharsis and seeing like, oh, how the children of the characters you love in the original turned out.
Who's everybody's, like, just to get back to the original series, who's everybody's favorite character? There's so many characters. We're not going to get through all of them, like, talking about each individual one. So I guess, like, who stands out to you?
Well, we talked a lot about Toru, but Yuki is my second favorite, which, you know, is very well good considering he really is the deuteragonist of the series in terms of the focus he gets, in terms of his character arc. He has the most other relationships with other characters that he gets involved with, his own storyline with the student council. And I do appreciate his growth in confidence and, like, as a person throughout the, you know, course of the story, to the point where, like, he is, like, at a point of maturity to, like, when everything is going, you know, wrong towards the last act, you know, with Toru getting hospitalized, he even reflects upon himself where he's like, hey, you know, I thought I'd be more in distress during the situation, but I'm surprised and pleased with how I'm handling things. Like, I feel more confident, self-assured in myself and how things are going. And, like, he's able to kind of snap sense back into Yo. He's able to recognize, like, again, what he was looking for in Toru was, like, he was looking for someone who could give him that, like, validation that he needed from, like, a mother or, like, a parental figure, like, didn't have, but that in recognizing that, he realizes that that's not what I want from, like, a romantic relationship. That's not, I want to love someone, but I also want to be loved back. I want to give as much as I take from someone else. And then I like how the story then exposes that with Machi and how he's able to have Machi out of her own, like, fraught circumstances with her relationship with her mother and her, like, a feeling of, like, just being overwhelmed by perfection because of this complex she's developed from, like, having to be raised to be, you know, perfect and everything, to inherit a family, then being thrown away and being considered boring. So, like, perfection just causes the conflicts. But then Yuki recognizes that he's going through something hard. He is able to be like what Toru was to him, and, like, lends the ear to her, kind of looks out for her. Like, I love the scene where, like, she's kind of, you know, getting anxiety, seeing, like, the perfect chalk that is being passed around in the council room, and then he makes a note to break the chalk to relieve her stress. So cute. I like that he's able to be that a source of support for Machi, and then grows a person that way by helping someone else. And you know, I think it's so great that the story ends with Yuki and Toru, like, Yuki just thanking Toru for everything that she has done for him and the family, and, like, assuring her that, yeah, like, even though we are parting ways, like, we will always be thinking of you because of how you've changed our lives, and me in particular, I have really changed a lot and grown a lot as a person because of you.
And then, so, yeah, you know, demonstrating really, like,
yeah,
you know, just as that perfect little cherry on the top of his character development, finally calling her by her first name.
Yeah, it's really lovely. And I think, yeah, even as a kid, when I was first experiencing Fruits Basket, like, a lot of Yuki's story really resonated with me. Like, the scene of, like, early on in the story where, like, they're walking home and Yuki's kind of transformed as a mouse, and that it's the scene where, like, Yuki's kind of confessing that he doesn't think that he can be as kind as Toru. He's really a kind person. And then Toru, like, tells him that, you know, my mom told me people aren't born kind. We all have, like, our own... Babies are born crying. They have wants and desires and stuff. And kindness is something that you kind of learn. And the shape of kindness differs from people to people. People express kindness in different ways. And I like him throughout the story kind of coming to grips with what his kindness is and how he can show that and express it to other people. So,
and going from, like, the place where he's, like, just so, you know, he feels bad because he has no room to be anything but self-absorbed, because, like, his entire every day is just taken up by survival, which is what it's like to be, you know, in that kind of traumatic situation. And just, like, watching him, you know, realize that, like, for the first time in his life, he has enough room to breathe that he can start to pay forward the kindness that he's gotten from others.
Yeah. It's a really lovely character journey. So, yeah. I think Toru and Yuki are just great deuteragonists to follow during the story. But there's so many compelling characters besides. Like, Momiji as a character, like, there's so many heart-wrenching moments with his backstory with his mother that, like, is always such a tearjerker in terms of...
I think Momiji's
the pain of that.
Story, like, because it's pretty much the first, like, Zodiac story that we get in... or the background.
Hot Stories comes first, and Hot Stories is also a tragic heartbreaker.
Oh, yeah.
His is like baby steps, though.
Yeah,
it's like
Hatori,
wading into the shallow end.
Like, he was an adult, so like it's heartbreaking, and it is gut wrenching. But Momiji's entire everything is just so sad. I'm pretty sure that's the first time, like, his story is the first time I sobbed. Like, I got all choked up with Hatori, but Momiji, I was like, oh my god, no. And just,
when he's doing, like, that first, like, Momiji has he's, like, kind of a character who ends up summing up a lot of the themes a lot of the time, so he has a lot of great, like, quotes. Like, that first one where he's like, I don't think there's any memory that's okay to forget. It's, like, just me sobbing on the couch.
He's the one who tells the traveler story,
Yes.
which reflects upon, like, how... to interpret other people's, like, selflessness. Like, you could either, like, look down on them, oh, this person's so easy to trick and take advantage of, or you could say, hey, this person is just so kind and giving, and that's something to be kind of admired, because through it all, they're happy. It's just, I think it's like,
it comes back to, like, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and just, like, you know, harboring all of these ugly emotions of, like, I have to manipulate people, I have to, you know, this person is so stupid. Why doesn't this person realize that the world is dark and cruel? Like, I realize that. And it's like, well, are you happy thinking like that? You know, because the foolish traveler was always happy. Because he always just assumed the best in other people. Like, if they were horrible to him, that was on them. You know, and suggesting that as, like, a way that's a positive, constructive way to live your life is to just, like, you know, be kind. Always try to understand other people wherever you can. Be empathetic, etc.
Absolutely. That really is, like, the biggest message, and that's Toru's biggest strength, is that, you know, she manages to help these people just by being kind to them. Just
like, loving unconditionally, right? Just saying, you know, you're a mess, and I love you anyway. You know?
But not loving blindly. She sees them for who they are as people, and tries and wants to understand them, which is such an important thing when Kyo is transformed into his true form, because his mother had always, you know, said, oh, I'll always love you, but it was just like it's something that Kyo could see through, that she was hiding how she really felt about him. She was hiding her fear because she was keeping him locked away from other people. Like, she wouldn't take him outside, you know. She wouldn't really engage with him as a person. But Toru, like, even though Toru was afraid of Kyo in his first form, like, even though she was having all these anxieties, she knew that if she had left Kyo, then, you know, he might never come back to her, and that overpowered any other fear she had. But she didn't hide those fears, she admitted them, and Kyo could recognize them. And that's what got through to him, is that Toru was genuinely approaching him from a place of caring about him as a person, and not just like talking or just saying it. You know, she
not
really
just being
meant
like,
it by her
oh,
actions.
for you, and being like, I can make myself look like a good person by treating this pathetic kid like he's worth something.
Genuinely, she wanted to help him in that moment. That's something that comes back again. Is like other character, like towards the end of the story, there's a question that gets brought up of like, Toru, do you only love Kyo out of pity? Like Kazuma's grandfather had like a wife that who only was with him out of pity. Like, oh, it was just so sad to see him alone. So I, you know, was with this guy. But
so
no, with Toru, it's sad. With Toru, no, that there's no pretense of that. Like, even though it takes her a while to admit these feelings to herself because of her own like fear of like, if I admit that Kyo is important to me, maybe even more important to me to my mother, am I betraying my mom and my memory of my mother? Like, Toru has to get over that hump of like being okay to let go of that. But once she does, like, you can, and everyone can see that no, her love for Kyo, or compare and compassion, it's genuine. And ultimately that's also what drives her to want to break the curse more than anything, that she comes to recognize. It is just that desire, no, I just love Kyo. I don't want anyone to take him from me. I don't want this curse to take him away from me. I don't want the Soma family to take him away from me. I wanted him to be by my side. So
she's really good at like coming at people where they are. Like, I always remember, like, in just like the very first volume, it's like, you know, Kyo's like super mean to her and like yells at her, because, you know, he's an idiot. Because for him, like, you know, his coping mechanism has been anger, to sort of lash out at anybody who's, you know, trying to get too close to him. And, you know, he ends up hurting Toru, and he feels really bad, and he wants to apologize to her. But, you know, and it's sort of played for comedy, but, like, every time he tries to apologize to her, Yuki's there, and he just gets pissed off and ends up yelling again. But Toru is so, like, emotionally intelligent as a character that she's like, oh, I think he was trying to apologize to me. And so she gives him room to do that the next time that he sees her, or she sees him. Or, you know, realizing that, like, oh, there's something here that Yuki is not telling me. But he's not ready to tell me yet, so I'm just going to be here when he is ready. You know, it's not your average teenager who can parse those kinds of things, but that is Toru's strength as a character, that she is very, you know, even if she's like, you know, a ditz who gets bad grades or whatever, she is very, very emotionally intelligent and a very strong person because of that. Which I think makes her such a good role model. Like, I love that this series is targeted at, you know, younger teenage girls. I think that Toru is, you know, is a good person to look up to.
Well, I think one of my qualms is a lot of people who aren't familiar or haven't read the entire series or watched the whole new anime or whatever see Toru in a very superficial way, and that she gets a lot of criticisms for her personality, for her hobbies, for all of these things, and it's like, well,
it makes me so mad.
Alright, but like, you're missing the point, and you've made an assumption about a character that, like, fair enough, like, at the beginning, if you're not if you don't know what you're expecting, she is just kind of this, you know, Pollyanna, as you described her, like very happy and sweet and polite and willing to, you know, do anything for everyone. But, you know, it is, as we've discussed, it becomes more and more obvious as to why she is that way. And by dismissing her or criticizing her as what you expected her character to be based off of a first impression is not fair. And I think it's something that even like very seasoned reviewers and that don't take the time to consider, or just like jump to a conclusion with that, which is, yeah, I mean, it's not fair on the series, and it's also not fair onto the character, and it's also not fair onto the hundreds of girls in the world who may have shadows or elements of that in their own personality, and to be completely dismissed is, you know, not great.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, I do see how she fits into, like, you know, the type of, I guess, shoujo protagonist that was quite popular at the time and now feels quite dated, of this, like, very Pollyanna-esque, like, you know, yay, I love my friends. My favorite hobbies are cooking and cleaning, you know. But it's like, she's so much more than that, and I feel like she's so much more than that from so early in the series.
Yeah. I think the groundwork is laid in that very first chapter. I mean, we discussed it before, but all the details of, like, why she's living alone, just camping out, like, why she doesn't want to be a bother to anyone, how she kind of conducts herself. Like, I think the groundwork for where, like, both her strengths of her character in terms of her kindness and compassion, but also where she needs to grow and, like, thinking more about herself and not putting other people first as much, and, like, recognizing what she really wants, and also kind of thinking about, like, what motivates her, like, where that is coming from inside of her, like, what is really deep at the root of that. Does it come from a purely selfless place, or is it motivated by something deep down she's afraid of that she needs to be able to, like, express to someone else? I think all of that is seeded very early on.
Yeah, and I love how she is such a flawed character, and, you know, she has such a complex multi-step journey that she has to go on to become this, you know, fully rounded person by the end, who can, you know, be a partner to Kyo. As Kyo is also going on a parallel journey, right, to be a worthy partner for Toru. It's like, I like that even as she's a very dynamic character who grows so much over time, even as she's got these deep-seated flaws, you know, that kindness and that loving nature of hers is very endemic to her character, and she never once loses it, and the story never once, you know, suggests that it's wrong for her to be that kind of person. It's very much like she has these qualities, and that's why she was able to do all of this. These qualities are good. It's just that the way that she was utilizing them as a coping mechanism, the way that they were twisted by her fears of abandonment, were toxic and painful. But her impulse to want to help people, her impulse to want to understand others, is fundamentally good. I don't know, I like that balance. But
absolutely,
I wanted to, like, touch on because there's, like, that one criticism of Toru, that she's just like this, you know, Pollyanna, whatever, boring shoujo protagonist, sexist, whatever. I feel like if you're looking late 90s shoujo manga sexism, like, come on. You can try harder than Fruits Basket.
Yeah.
But there's quite a varied, even as it is kind of a reverse harem with a largely male-heavy cast, like, there's quite a lot of variety in the female characters in Fruits Basket that you did not often see during that time. But there's also, like, the complaint that goes along with that the most often that I see is that Kyo is abusive. And I'm like, literally, this series is about abuse. And it's about victims, survivors of abuse. Like, recognizing their toxic coping mechanisms and learning how to grow past them and become, you know, more fully rounded people. Like, it's a very heavy-handed metaphor of, like, these people who are not fully human, they literally turn into animals, overcoming their trauma and becoming human. Like, so it's like, of course he's mean at the start, but it's very clear from, like, the first chapter that he's in that, like, he's not happy with the person that he is there. He's trying to change. You know, and Toru recognizes that in him. She's like, oh, she's not like, oh, he's mean to me, but I have to be nice to him. She's like, I recognize that he's trying to be nice in his own way, and I'm going to meet him where he's at. You know?
Yeah, it takes him a while to break out of his, like, defensive, like, angry habits, but from the very beginning, he, like, is self-aware of, like, hey, I don't want to treat this person so rudely or badly. Like, I want to be considerate of the reasons. It's like the third chapter of the story.
Yeah.
Is that he, like, yells at Toru, and he feels bad about it.
He feels bad
and so he goes to apologize.
He goes to apologize, and she's like, oh, he yelled at me, but then he felt bad about me. He's actually a sincere person who knows, who feels bad when he's done wrong. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like that unwillingness to let people grow is exactly what the series is telling you to stop being like that.
Especially for a 16-year-old who's been raised
Right?
in this super abusive environment his whole life.
Yeah. It's like, Jesus,
Yeah.
have a bit of humanity. It's like,
we're only following these characters over a period of 3 years. Like, you know, we gotta let them grow.
I feel like Fruits Basket is on my short list of series that, like, your bad opinions about it tell me this is my hot take for the podcast. Fruits Basket is on my short list of series with, like, Utena and Penguin Drum and, like, Evangelion with series that's like, your bad opinions about it do tell me something about who you are as a person.
Do you really understand the message of the story? Or you...
It's like, I think Shinji's a pussy. Oh, okay.
Well, that's very telling. Yeah, it's a similar.
Are you my suitcase? Because there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, it's I mean, it can be hard, especially when you are expecting a title to be, you know, a title of that era. Like, if you have an expectation for something, it's hard to go in without that expectation. But, like with everything, go in with the lowest expectations so then you can be pleasantly surprised. No, but I do think that there's somewhat of a lack of critical thinking when it comes to a lot of these series that, like, I don't know why it happens to Fruits Basket, because they really do handhold you and, like, hammer home, like, this is all the bad shit that's happening.
Yeah, right?
But
I mean, I feel that way about Utena, too. I'm like, yeah, it's weird, but it's kind of holding your hand a little bit about who to trust and who not to.
With its... Yeah, I mean, it's direct with its message. Like, it says it out loud several points.
It's
so,
got, like, these
you know.
cute little morality plays throughout the first half of the story that are, like, they all have the same message.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the message of the story.
Literally the only thing that Takia could have done more was, which she did at several points, is have a character break out of character, stare directly at the camera and the audience and be like, this is the moral of the story. This is the theme we're talking about.
That's like half of Momiji's role.
Exactly!
Exactly that. And this is what we learned today, kids.
Did you realize that the real curse is this abusive family?
Did you?
Oh my
and
god.
not the fact we transform into animals?
Yeah.
Say that Yuki whines too much.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, I'm going. This was, okay, an unnamed, large, anime, reviewing and encyclopedia site. Mm-hmm. Their episode reviews. After a while, there was a switch in who was writing them, but the new writer kept being like, oh my god, he's such a tortured soul with his evil mom, and I was like, wow, have a heart.
I really hope no one
Sometimes
in that person's friends or family is, like, struggling with a really bad home situation, because, like, I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even just...
And I think they did soften on him as they went through his arc, but it's like they kept bringing it back to that like it was a funny joke, and I was like, sometimes people have been through like years of bullshit, and they just have to kind of word vomit for a while before they can like function. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jesus, let him talk about his fucking problems. And acting like his mom is not a realistic depiction of a narcissistic mother, I feel like suggests that you have not met a narcissist.
Yeah.
I think...
I do see a criticism, like, one criticism I had seen from someone I know is that, like, there are just... The amount of terrible parents in the series is just too unrealistic, and I feel like all these specific relationships that we see though are actually rooted in some very kind of realistic forms of like abusive parental relationships. I don't think anything in it is quite exaggerated at all. I know, and I do speak to that based on my own experiences, you know, personally. But like I truly felt empathetic to all these characters and what they're going through. And I think like these are real places of like resentment,
especially within a community that is so insular.
Yeah, they're all Soma parents.
Encouraged.
All of it's encouraged. Yeah. Like, it is actively encouraged for parents to be like Yuki's parents, the parents of the rat. You know, if they're even a little bit selfish, obviously are going to sell their child to the head of the family because, you know, that's just the best deal for them. Mm-hmm. You know, otherwise they're going to be bugged by Akito and all of her goons for, like, ever. Mm-hmm.
And
why would you not do that?
And it's not like
other than being a good person, but they're not good people. So,
and there's no way, like, if you were a parent who refused to do that, then you would be completely kicked out. Like, there wouldn't be an option for you to leave with your child and your partner. Mm-hmm. It would be, okay, well, I'm taking your child and you get out of here.
Yep.
Like, there's no...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the financial compensation that... Because they do, like, this is just another chain that they bind these families to Akito with, is that they do receive financial compensation that is enough to live comfortably on. It's a very rich family. Mm-hmm. Just for having a Zodiac child. So, you know, add to that the fact that, like, his mother is clearly a narcissist who has only ever seen her children as tools for her own ends as extensions of herself. So, like, if he doesn't do the perfect thing at all times, then, you know, it's a reflection on her. Which is how narcissists are. Like, that's just how it is. You know?
No. Yeah, that's a very realistic type of person.
Or, like, Kyo's dad as well is such... He's so pathetic, but he's such a realistic kind of pathetic.
Right. I mean, he's another example of, like, what Kyo self-actualized and realized, oh, this is what I was doing to Yuki. It's like I was putting all my guilt and blame off on him. Like, that's what Kyo's dad is doing to Kyo. It's like Kyo's dad, deep down, probably knows that, oh, I'm the reason that, primarily, that I drove my wife to her death, and it's easier for me, rather to engage in my culpability in that, to push all of that onto Kyo. It's like he's the one at fault. He's the one who really killed her, because he is this cursed child who is, you know, an object, meant to be an object of scorn anyway. So it's okay to,
well, it's just
to
like
single him out as that.
Blaming others is how he's, you know, gone so far in life. Is he's just blamed one person and then another, as long as he doesn't have to look at himself, which is also what Kyo was struggling with. You know, if I push the blame onto someone else, then I don't have to look at myself. But he chooses to look at himself in the end, and thus his path diverges from his father.
I think this is a great segue, this whole conversation, into the other question that we got for this month from Maramichi, at Maramichi on Twitter, saying, to many people, Fruits Basket is dear and special because they encountered it during dark and difficult times in their lives. Was your encounter with Fruits Basket like this, and what makes Fruits Basket special to you? Which character's arc resonated the most with you?
Yuki. Yep. I already said that.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, I certainly haven't... It's kind of hard to say why in any detail, because I think that what's special about the series is that it does look at trauma and abuse and even bullying from so many different angles, and ultimately comes out with, you know, a very strong message in favor of pushing yourself to grow, in favor of, you know, not just finding a support system wherever you can, but also being that support system for others. About, you know, setting healthy boundaries for yourself, about self-actualizing, about, like, you know, just living with empathy wherever you go, realizing that we're all just people and we all fuck up, and that's okay. And we're all trying for the most part. And we can recognize that trying in other people.
Yeah. And it's okay to stumble along the way. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. You know, don't beat yourself up over it or give in, like, to despair over that. Like, I love the message that Kyoko tells Arisa in Arisa's backstory. Is like, you know, think of it as like fertilizer that'll help you grow.
Yeah.
You know, like all the mistakes, all the stumbling, falling, hurting other people, like along your path to being better. Like, think about these experiences as something that'll shape you into a better person as you continue to fight your way to that. So, yeah.
Sure, it feels like shit, but it'll help you grow.
Yeah. The full quote is so great. But I also agree, Yuki's arc, I mentioned it before, but like it definitely resonated with me. And yeah, his specific circumstances also resonated my specific experiences. I mentioned Sawa in another, even more closely so, but like this, Yuki's relationship with his mother and like his feelings of not being able to vocalize like him what he really wants, or like his fear of doing that in front of Akito, in front of his mother. I could relate to those feelings. There are a lot of ways characters express themselves, are afraid to, in the series that I could relate with. I think that's what's great about the series is that, yeah, it's through the different approaches, it kind of manages to encompass a lot of different universal experiences, even though like a lot of the specifics of like each character's story, you're not necessarily likely to experience in a general sense. Like these different feelings they're going through, their anxieties, their different reflections of strained relationships, are something that you can see, hopefully, examples of in your own life, and then perhaps give you uh, some a good spirited message of like how to approach the situation in your own life. I mean, I since I read the bulk of the series only last year, Fruits Basket didn't come to me necessarily. Well, I mean, the earlier parts of the series, like I mentioned before, like a lot of messages in the with Yuki, like as I mentioned in that scene about like kindness and like people not born kind. That was a formative message for me. Kisa's story was a formative thing of like you can't, it's a common message like, hey, you should be able to like yourself first, otherwise, and before you can expect other people to like you. That's the message like Kisa's teacher wrote in the note. But then like Yuki just, because he can relate and recognize Kisa's trait, he vocalizes that, hey, how are you supposed, if you don't have another person to recognize your good qualities and be able to tell them to you, if you don't have that outside perspective on yourself, how are you able to recognize them in yourself and then grow? And I think that was a formative like moment and message for me as well.
Yeah, that's also
a lot of things like that.
Sorry, just on the Kisa thing, that's also such a good like I guess response or like argument against like the typical treatment of like bullying situations in Japanese schools. Because a lot of times, the impulse is to be like, if a kid is getting bullied, there's something different about them that's their fault, that they should, fix their shit and then come back to school and then they won't be bullied anymore. So I think that Kisa's story has that extra resonance, especially now that I've worked in a Japanese school system, going back to it being like, no, it wasn't her fault that she got bullied, And it's not.
And especially since that's such a common message, is like to say, hey, you should like yourself if like you're someone who's depressed or someone who's like dealing with these like feelings of like low self-worth or something. Like a lot of times that is a common message, like, hey, you should like yourself and before expecting like receiving attention from or validation from other people. But like sometimes you need other people to recognize what's good in you. If you're in that dark place or you can't recognize what's good about yourself, like you need that push, you need that outside perspective to like ground you into like understanding yourself not as the horrible person or that you think you might be, or like the worthless person you think you might be. Like you need someone to see the good in you, to see your good qualities. And that's something we see in the story is like, Yuki and Kyo have separately like they feel like they are not great people in certain ways, and they see in the other qualities that they want in themselves. If only they had at an earlier time been able to confess those to each other, they may have been able to work through some of those problems and earlier and come to a better understanding of themselves. But that's the message. That's why Tori was such a great person for them to be brought into their lives, because she could recognize those qualities in them that they weren't seeing in themselves.
Yeah,
and that helped them give themselves more confidence as people. So I think that's a great message. Like Fruits Basket challenges this common like refrain that a lot of people would normally give advice to, that is often more damaging than helpful to people who are like really struggling with these with these feelings of depression or low self-worth or whatnot.
Yeah, support group is so important.
I also wanted to say, like, this isn't necessarily the most relatable story arc. But one that I think gets overlooked a little bit is Ayane and his relationship with Yuki, and his relationship with himself prior to trying now to get close to Yuki. The idea of as an and he says it himself that he hasn't been a good brother to Yuki, which he's now very in his own way trying to fix, much to Yuki's chagrin. But it's something that I think is very understandable, because ultimately, although he is the older brother, he's also trying to escape from the situation that he's been in his whole life. And it can be seen as very selfish, and in a way it is very selfish, but it's not like when you are also someone trying to escape this stranglehold of an abusive family, of everyone around you having expectations for you, you can get so caught up in saving yourself that you kind of forget that, you know, other people who are important to you might also need that support. And so I find it very, very understandable as to him going through that now that he is in a better place, now that he has escaped from this complete control and has his, you know, his partner and his little shop and whatever else, that he can now reflect on not only his past selfishness and like just kind of doing his own thing, but how he treated Yuki and how that he failed him as a brother. And I think that's a really it's a part of the story that's kind of, it's introduced early on, and it's treated as a lot of a joke, because obviously Ayane is a very interesting with his affections.
Bombastic, boisterous, flamboyant, many different adjectives to describe him.
Yes, yeah, exactly. To which Yuki is just completely, you know, not willing to bring, which is again understandable, is not something like, it's very hard to start accepting attention and affection from someone who you felt abandoned by throughout your earlier life. But I think,
well, and it's like
their relationship and they're becoming more aware of each other is a really a really important part of Yuki's character arc, as well as Ayane's character growth. Like, it's
well, in the end, like, you know, with the parent-teacher conference and everything, like, it was Ayame who had to give him, like, just that slight little opening to, you know, sorry to bring it back to Utena again, but, you know, cracking the coffin so that Anthe can open it for herself, right? It's, you know, cracking the door for Yuki, just that one last little bit so that he can, you know, really shine, come out of his cocoon, finally, you know, tell his mom that, you know, no, he's not just gonna follow her plan. That he's gonna be just as much of a disappointment as Ayame, gladly, proudly. Yeah, I do love their relationship, and I think it's also so realistic that, like, you know, Ayame is, you know, by his nature, not the most sensitive person on the planet. I think there's plenty of people in the world who are like that. And that combined with just, you know, protecting himself, you know, having already grown up with that set of parents and with Akito, you know, seeing that the spotlight has moved away from him, you know, it's a lot easier to be like, well, okay, as long as they're dealing with him, they won't be dealing with me. And it's like, if you speak up at all in that situation, you're always afraid that that spotlight is going to come back on you. So it's like, why wouldn't you ignore the person who's being kicked down, you know, when the only thing that would happen if you tried to help them is that you would be in the dirt too now, you know? it's very understandable, but then it also ties into this overall theme of, it's never too late to change.
Mm-hmm.
Once you are in a place where you realize what you've done wrong and you can take steps to make it better, then, as long as you're still alive, you have a right to change.
Mm-hmm.
You can never, you can keep growing, and, other people can accept that or not, but I think what makes Ayame's attempts positive in the end is that he's not looking for Yuki to like him and love him.
Mm-hmm.
He's just looking to understand each other and have some kind of relationship. He says, like, it would be fine if he hated me, because that would mean that we were looking at each other in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
But what he's afraid of is the nothingness that they have at the beginning of the series. Where it just, there's not a bad relationship or a good relationship. There's just no relationship. And that's what makes him the most afraid of all.
Yes, indeed. But, yeah, that's both of our questions. Thank you again to everyone, Kendra and Marumichi, for sending in wonderful questions. Was there anything else that we wanted to talk about with Fruits Basket?
I mean, yeah, I could keep going, but...
Yeah. There's so many characters, even among the Zodiacs.
Yeah, we could keep talking for,
we haven't talked about Haru or Rin, but...
Yeah, the person that I'm defending for my entire life, Hiro.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Hiro. He's just a kid who needed to, like, again... He had a defensive mechanism of, like, he was jealous of Toru, and so, like, he acts bratty. He, like, acts bratty, like, as a way to, hide his own insecurities or whatnot.
He's another one where people are always like, he's abusive.
I was about to say, Ray, aren't you aware that this
10-year-old
is abusive?
He's 10!
Aren't you aware that this 10-year-old is creating a toxic situation for our protagonist? It's like, yes, that's...
she's 16.
What is wrong?
He's 10.
He's doing his best. He's being considerate of the people around. He cares about the people around him.
Oh my gosh.
He doesn't know what to do to help.
He's so smart and, kids like him are, like, some of my favorites in the classroom. So I'm like... Don't you come after my children. Even though they're a pain to deal with sometimes. Isn't that every kid?
But I mean, if we were talking, like, there's literally no time to talk about everyone, because if we did, it would be a 12-hour podcast, and as much as I'm sure all of us would be happy and willing, our podcasting platform is not for 12. But I think ultimately, as the discussion has already mentioned, it's a series with a huge cast of characters, all incredibly strong, with, like, really powerful, important arcs, like character growth. Although they come from, like, similar backgrounds, Zodiac-wise, there's so many different ways that the characters handle it, that these particular issues are being explored, that it doesn't, for a series that has 12 characters, well, more, but 12, the Zodiac characters, 13 characters, or 14 even.
14.
Who 14. Are in, like, such an abusive cycle. It never feels samey. Like, it could have very easily become, like, okay, yes, wow, this person's had a traumatic background. We saw this 5 other times beforehand. Like, there's a very powerful message and a very powerful exploration of all of these characters and their personalities and how they deal with it and how they come out of that throughout Fruits Basket. And I think that's the real testament to how strong of a story this is, in that it's a longer longish for a shojo. It's full of characters. It's got a lot of moving parts. It's got a lot of very high emotion moments. Entirely. And it's emotionally draining. It's very much hard to get through at points. It's dense. It makes you feel a lot of things. But that is what has kept it as such a beloved classic for the last 20 plus years, right? Like, there's a reason this story persists. It's why it's so beloved. It's why it got a new adaptation those last couple of years, because it's an important story that is timeless. It is sadly very relevant, very relatable to a lot of people. And as we've all of us, or we've through the discussion brushed on, and as some of the questions have mentioned, it's something that brings comfort to a lot of people in their own struggles, or in their own sad situations, traumatic situations. It's something that crosses the boundaries of what people might expect from a girl's comic from the mid 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s, which again is a testament to people's assumptions, but there's there's not completely unfounded.
Yeah. There it is, what we talk about every episode.
But if for any listener who hasn't read it, hasn't seen the show, or has only seen the first anime adaptation as well, because tonally that's a little bit different comparatively to the manga and this newer season. Like with anything, adaptation brings strengths and weaknesses to every version. But do give the manga a try. It's Takuya's, in my opinion, Takuya's best work. I don't think that's a controversial statement.
No. She said so herself.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was like, I don't think I'm ever going to make another thing as good as Fruits Basket.
And
I'm like, you know what? That's so fair.
It is fair. I mean, it's if you've read it, like, oh boy, it would be hard to top that, right? Like, there's not much that you could add to Fruits Basket to make it better than it already is. But
more, okay, queerness. Okay, there's everyone's straight. It's distressing.
a more queer ending would, yes, be better. Less adult and like teenage relationships would also be good. But again, both of those things, I think, a testament to just being mid 2000s shoujo, right? Like that's just all right.
It would make it better, though.
Yeah, I think we have come a long way. I think there's a better understanding nowadays that maybe stray away from this. Like, I think Boat Clamp in Clear Card has kind of moved away from some of those.
Clamp has so much to answer for.
One classmate moved to another school, so we don't have to engage with her relationship with her teacher. And then in another, the end of the series was setting up, is there going to be something between Hanajima and Kazuma? But then in another, it's like, nope, she ended up with someone else, and presumably her own age. So we don't have to engage with that.
Oh my god, Kazuma's like 49.
Reason Kareno. So, I think we've grown a bit. But...
Yeah.
Yeah.
We, as...
Honestly, Akito and Shigure is a weird...
They only met each other twice also, It's like, why are you so obsessed with each other after meeting each other twice? And
true love,
having a 9-year age
true love
difference
prevails, and you don't question it.
Soulmates, soul bond.
Don't question it.
Again,
that's not in conflict with the main theme of the series at all.
No, not at all.
Anyway, so Fruits Basket is really, really good, but it could be even better. But it's not.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
It's still dang good for what it is. But, yeah, I think hopefully this conversation, this discussion has been entertaining. I've greatly enjoyed it, and it's been fabulous to have you on, Lum. Much anticipated.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
It was fun.
I really enjoyed it too. Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you for everyone listening, for Lum for joining us for this extra special series spotlight for Natsuki Takeya's Fruits Basket. If at this point, somehow through all of the spoilers and everything else, and you haven't read or watched it, and you're not interested, just do it. Like, just go, what is, just do yourself the favor, right? Like, come on. Also, apologies if you got to this point, you never read it, and we just spoiled everything, but it's fine. We did give that warning.
There's plenty we did not discuss that you will discover and enjoy if you read it for yourself. Even if we talked about
15
the
other
broad
characters
themes.
that we didn't even touch on.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about Rin. She's like crucial.
Yeah, no,
Shigure.
exactly.
Like, freaking Akito. We kept, like, I started using she, her pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't explain the whole thing with Akito, so, like, anyone who's read, like, 5 volumes of the manga is gonna be like, what?
What?
Wait.
And there's
What
so
happened?
much to dig into there, too, with her character. It's
Oh
like,
my goodness.
yeah. No, there's a wealth to discover and appreciate and talk about in Fruits Basket. So, absolutely, if you've enjoyed us talking about it, but you haven't really engaged with the series or only engaged with a part of the series, like, definitely take the opportunity to experience the whole thing, because it is, like, a very cathartic journey and with really strong messages, very compelling character arcs. I think it was a huge deal. It was a huge deal when it came out in the 2000s over here. It was not only Tokyo Blot's best-selling title, it's one of the best-selling manga period of its heyday, and for good reason. Like, it created
also,
waves because it resonates so broadly and so well with so many people. With
I
how
also
it
want to
explores
say,
these.
it isn't not... A big part of its broad appeal, I think, is that it's not just exclusively emotionally exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's really funny.
No.
Yeah.
And it's really heartwarming, and it's full of cute animals. Like, there's a lot that the series has going for it that, like, is just in, how fun of a series it is that we didn't even get into, so...
Yeah, if you're worried that this is just, like, misery porn, like, it's just seeing people, like, go through hardship after hardship, like... coupled with all of those stories is a message of hope. It's a message of things can get better for these people. It's not there's also a message of, like, things will get better if you have the willingness and have the courage to change. And we do have examples in the series of some characters who do not, like, towards the end of the story. But overall, and by the end of the story, the vast majority of our main characters, they have made so much growth, and they are on the road to happier lives, and we're seeing different steps, different moments of, like, happiness, also coupled with them overcoming, growing past these moments of engaging with trauma or these difficult situations that are causing them so much hardship. Like, it is a story about, like, hope, and, like, a story about fighting for a happier future for yourself. So it's not just, like, about dwelling in, like, the traumas of the past. It's about, like, embracing them, like, learning from them, and then moving forward to be a better person and happier person.
Exactly. This is not an Inio Asano series. I'm going to be controversial right at the end.
Very
But yeah, thank you once again to our guests. Thank you to everyone who sent in your questions. Next month, we have another guest, actually, and we are doing I guess this is a genre topic. We are talking about manga, i.e. manga about the process of writing, creating, whatever, being a mangaka. whether that be fictional, a la you and my favorite, right?
Our favorite series.
Or a more
Bakuman.
Yes. Or a more like autobiographical piece, of which there are many. There's a lot of manga about manga, so hopefully we will broaden people's awareness of that fact, so people don't just continue to recommend Bakuman to everyone.
Bakuman.
Yeah, no, there's so many good ones besides Bakuman. I am reaching out to your listeners right now. I mean, you're going to give out great examples on next for sure, but Bakuman's something to be all and all.
I mean, to be honest, we actually have to do, like, a separate episode that's just about Bakuman to get all of our feelings out.
Oh, God, Bakuman. Yeah, man. I can't lie and say it wasn't formative at a point in time, but revisiting it is just, there's just so much that's difficult to engage with.
From chapter 1, it is just out of the gate with the,
just outrun misogyny. Like, Tsugumi Oba is just
a terrible,
audaciously sexist writer.
We just need to destroy that man's whole career. I know Platinum Man already did that, but like we really need to give him that final nail in the coffin, because holy moly.
Drive a stake through his vampiric heart. But anyway. Manga about manga.
Manga about manga. If you have any questions for us to discuss during that podcast, be sure to leave them in the comment section down below if you're listening to this on YouTube. As always, you can listen to this also on pretty much every major podcasting platform: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all of the Anchor FM, which is where we host all of them. And you can send your questions in directly to me when I tweet about it. As always, you can find me at CollectingG on Twitter or on the Simply G YouTube channel. Ray is on Whimsical Pictures and also at Whimsical Pix, Pix, on Twitter. Be sure to follow her there because she is funny and charming and Mimi all of the time.
Mimi, yep.
And
it's just pictures of monkeys and theater girls.
Yes. And of course, Lum, let our wonderful listeners know where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at LumRanmaYasha. Basically, anywhere I am, I'm there by that name, like AnyList or Animation Revelation or whatnot. And you can also find Manga Mavericks on Twitter at Manga_Mavericks, and we're on every podcast platform you can think of, Apple Podcasts and whatnot. Same with Lum Squad at Lum_Squad, and also every platform you can think of that I mentioned earlier. But if you want to see the art I do, illustrations, animations, and the like, you can find my Instagram at SidArtWorks.
Perfect. And absolutely go listen to Manga Mavericks if you are not, because it is fantastic. There's a great podcast of which I've had a small piece of being a part of, but is just overwhelmingly wonderful to listen to. They have fantastic guests and fantastic discussions. But yes, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of October. Enjoy spooky season whilst it lasts, but look after yourselves, stay healthy, stay kind, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye till then.
Bye, guys.
Sayonara.